Good day to you all, and welcome to today's FlightGlobal webinar, Network Planning in the New Reality. My name is Pilar Wolfsteller. I'm FlightGlobal's America's Air Transport Editor based in Las Vegas, and I'll be your moderator for today. Airlines and airports are now picking up the pieces of their shattered networks after the coronavirus grounded the majority of passenger traffic earlier this year. Countries that sealed borders or imposed onerous restrictions to stop the spread are slowly opening up again. This week at the Boyd conference, Airlines for America said that forward bookings are still more than 60% lower than a year ago, and that a full recovery to 2019 levels won't occur until 2024. This creates long-term uncertainty for everyone in the industry, but especially those in the network planning community. They're the ones who are responsible for figuring out the most effective way to put the pieces of the air transportation jigsaw puzzle back together again. As air travel takes its first tenuous steps toward this new normal, what factors will drive the planning for which routes return first? How might route maps change permanently as a result of the crisis? And is there anything that planners can rely on right now as we move forward into Q4 and 2021? How are airline network planners juggling the twin requirements of liquidity preservation on the one hand and customer convenience on the other? Which routes can they reinstate? In which frequency, on which type of aircraft, to offer what kind of capacity? Some airlines may not survive the crisis, or they'll emerge on the other side in a very different form, but all will be forced to reappraise their networks. What tactics should airports use to retain customers or to lure new ones? And how will the crisis change the entire relationship between airports and airlines? These are just some of the questions network planning colleagues across aviation have been asking as we assess the damage the coronavirus has wrought on our industry. Our discussion today will focus on the challenges in North America, but we recognize that other regions are facing similar issues. This webinar today is helped made possible thanks to our sponsors, Miami International Airport, a top gateway to Latin America and the Caribbean and the third busiest airport for international passengers in the US, as well as leading global travel data provider OAG. Joining the discussion are OAG's chief analyst, John Grant, who is an expert at crunching the numbers and telling a story about the winners and the losers of this crisis. There's certainly some really interesting insights that we can draw from the data he's about to present. John Kirby, to a great many of you airport folk in particular, needs no introduction, as he was a regular personality at the annual network events FlightGlobal stage between 2001 and 2013. He is Vice President of Network Planning at Spirit Airlines, leading long-term strategy, commercial fleet planning, capacity planning, and schedule planning and distribution. He's an airline veteran with past stints at US Airways, Southwest, and Alaska, among others. Mark Gallardo, Vice President, Network Planning and Alliances at Air Canada. Mark is responsible for network planning, including Mainline, Air Canada Rouge, and carriers operating under the Air Canada Express brand. He also leads management of Star Alliance and codeshare agreements, as well as joint ventures. And last but certainly not least, Chris Mangos, Director of Marketing at Miami International Airport. His remit includes passenger and cargo marketing programs, including route and air service development. He's been at MIA for 32.5 years, and prior to that worked at Boston's Logan International. Before we launch into our discussion, allow me to explain the format. We're live for the next 55 minutes or so, and this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it afterwards. We'll begin with a short presentation from John Grant, who will explain some of the trends that he's seeing. I'll then kick off the discussion, and after that, the panelists look forward to answering your questions. Please ask your questions via the Q&A icon and not the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Behind the scenes here at FlightGlobal are Chloe Bass and Murdo Murison, who'll be making sure all runs smoothly. If you have a technical issue, you can reach them via the chat function. Great, so now that we have the logistics out of the way, please turn your attention to John Grant, who will start us off with a short presentation. John, the floor is yours.
Hello.
John, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be with you. Pleasure to present this data. It's fascinating. Chloe, if you could move on to the first slide, I think that will put it into context. This slide is one that we have presented in OAG for many weeks. We're reporting week 38 of this, which feels like we're giving birth to a baby boy or something, the way it's going. But as you can see here, I live very near the coast, and people talk about a V-shaped recovery and a U-shaped recovery. And I describe quite frequently what we see here as society and aviation falling off a cliff into a sea in a period of about 2 or 3 weeks in the end of March. We saw some quite dramatic capacity and demand declines. A 68% fall in a 3-week period in the United States and North American market, and a very much higher percentage decline in capacity in Latin America, but off a much smaller base. And unlike any other event we've ever seen, and recovery in the aviation industry, be it a SARS pandemic or a financial crisis, essentially, we've managed to swim our way back onto the beach. We've struggled as an industry back onto the beach, but we are exhausted, and we do not know how to climb back up the cliff. And everything seems to be conspiring against us. And it's really, I think, quite worrying, and it's quite frightening as we begin to see the dark nights returning in North America, that we are still in this position. Some of the key points that I'd like to just share with you. North American capacity is at the same point as it was in July of this year, hovering around 50% of last year's capacity. We have not seen that hoped for continual growth spurt. And indeed, in the last 9 weeks, the average rate of growth is just below 0. So that is a bit of a worry. And in Latin America, we have seen in that 9-week period a bit more of a recovery, but that has to be put into the context of there being nearly 0 international capacity operated in lower South America throughout May to the end of August and early July. So for me personally, as someone who's tracking this and has been deeply involved, it begs some key questions. The first one, I think, which hopefully we can share some light on is this it for winter 2021 and beyond? Is it going to get any better? Or is this the best it is going to be? Or dare I even suggest, could it get worse? Traditionally, we know the winter season sees less capacity. There are some strong leisure markets in North America that work in an opposite direction to that, but generally the market softens in the winter period. So Chloe, let's have a look in a bit more detail at some of the data that we extracted for you. I'm not trying to pick out winners and losers. I'm just trying to create context here. But these are some of the key data points that we have seen. So what I'm showing you here for both North America and Latin America is the relative winners in terms of airline capacity. And it's a bit counterintuitive to say a winner perhaps is someone like John, or someone who's only lost 41% of their capacity compared to, unfortunately, Mark at 75% of his capacity. It's a really tough world for an airline network planner, and we as much as them sharing their experiences with us today, we must empathize with the challenges they must have in building their networks and trying to create their networks. And then similarly in Latin America, the situation isn't quite so bad, but many of these airlines have still seen capacity cuts, but there is growth in some of the airlines in the last couple of weeks. And then if we just look on the right-hand side, I just want to point out that although we're seeing capacity being cut today, and to Pilar, the point you were making in the Boyd conference this week, forward bookings for the November-January period generally look very soft relative to capacity. So we have a major challenge about have we still got too much capacity in? And in that context, it will be interesting to draw parallel in the European market today, where Ryanair announced a 40% capacity cut across their network. Are we going to see similar things happening in the North American market? That will be interesting to know. And Chloe, finally, if we look at the airports, then you can see again some of the relative winners and some of the relative losers. And you know, I think it's very interesting that many of those airports that have fared quite well in North America happen to be those that are have a large share of low-cost airline capacity and operate point-to-point networks rather than have complex hub operations and more of a domestic network as well. And I think finally, just to point out how well Tijuana seems to be doing in Latin America, and is that just exploiting a geographic position? So, you know, in context, we have lots to talk about. You know, I look at the data, but I'm more interested and excited to listen to the experts who are trying to have to plan their way through this. So let me hand back to you and let's start the discussion.
Thanks so much, John. So as we saw from the chart, we know that the second quarter was a disaster for everyone, but John's data also shows a new problem here, that past 9 weeks have been flat at best with no real indication that this is going to change going into the all-important end of year travel season. I mean, we have Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, and of course all the snowbirds coming down to places like Florida and Arizona. So I'd love to hear from our airline experts about what they are doing to manage through what in normal times should be a critical season. Are you increasing capacity on spec, so to speak, and seeing what sticks? Or how far ahead do you pull the plug on these things, on what doesn't? And what are the factors that go into making those kinds of decisions? So if we could start with John Kirby, what is Spirit's network and capacity looking like now that we're 8 months into the pandemic, no end in sight, and the holidays are just around the corner?
Yeah, no, we've been managing it very close in, and you see this across the at least the USA carriers. We've been waiting to the last possible minute to load our subsequent month schedule because we're trying to read as many tea leaves as we possibly can. I don't know if Mark's experienced this in Canada, but the booking curve is so compressed now that you really don't get a read until much closer in. So what we've been looking for is clues. We studied the TSA data, you know, what markets are performing better than others in terms of throughput. We obviously look at our own internal data where we're seeing advanced bookings. We look at look to book data. So where are people going online and looking to see where they want to go? And really just trying to come up with a game plan. I will say we are starting to see some momentum. We got kind of a false start back in June through the July 4th holiday. I think a lot of us were feeling like we're coming out of this. You know, you tend to harken back and think about past crises, and you thought, well, okay, maybe this is coming out. And then what happened was a number of, I'd say, sensational headlines coupled with quarantines, particularly from the tri-state area to many states in the US, just completely cratered demand. And so as we got to the end of the summer, I think we were all being pretty cautious. And I think most carriers had a pretty good Labor Day. And they saw demand continue to tick up as we went into September and the fall. So I'd say we're cautiously optimistic. We've adjusted our capacity to really reflect where we think the demand's going to be, which is really leisure and what we call VFR, visiting friends and relatives. That seems to be holding up. Our data seems to indicate that people are getting a little more comfortable with flying on airplanes. You know, the recent, you were at the Boyd conference, I was watching virtually, you know, the study that says you're more likely to get struck by lightning. Those studies help, but I do think people are getting much more comfortable. So we are seeing some improvement in demand. We did load our November schedule last week, and I think it's about 75% of last year. So I would say we're optimistic cautiously, but we do see demand in the leisure and VFR markets.
So you mentioned a good point talking about quarantines. I'd like to move on to Mark at Air Canada. I mean, Canada's had a very strict rules and regulations about, effectively sealing itself off from the rest of the world with this 14-day quarantine, mandatory quarantine for all inbound passengers. You've got, like I mentioned earlier, all the snowbirds that are going to want to go to American US destinations in the coming months. What is your schedule looking like a couple of weeks out from that?
Thanks for the question. So just for here in Canada, it's been a remarkably stable situation in that since March, we've had a complete ban on foreign nationals entering the country. We've had a closure of the Canada-US border, which is something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. We have quarantines even within the country in that you can't enter certain provinces without quarantining for 14 days. And none of this has changed. None of these regulations have relaxed. So it's been a relatively stable and predictive environment, which is a little bit sad to say. We have, our network is kind of divided over North America and international, and it's a tale of two stories. On the international side, I joke with my colleagues that we basically run a cargo airline, and I report to the cargo department, and that the cargo department is basically covering, in many cases, the cash costs of operating our international services. Within North America, where there is the ability to travel without quarantine, so that's basically within certain provinces in Canada, we've observed a rebound. So our transcontinental routes between Eastern Canada and Western Canada have been somewhat resilient, but also in Canada being a commodity-based country with a lot of resources and a lot of workers migrating, we've seen in the west part of the country where there's significant mining and the oil sands, et cetera, we've seen a decent recovery there as well. But that's basically it. Canadians are allowed to travel by air across the border, and we are starting to see some significant search demand for leisure destinations in the US. I think the thought of snowbirds spending a winter in Canada is relatively frightening to them, so they're still willing to entertain the idea of going down to Florida and spending the winter there. So we're starting to see that build up a little bit, but it's nothing material at this point. So we've been hovering around the minus 80% range for quite some time, and we're going to be there until probably around the Christmas period. And we're hoping to see some of this significant search data actually lead to a concrete uptick in bookings.
Thank you, Mark. If I can move on to Chris now at Miami International. I mean, you're the destination that everybody wants to go to, but it seems that you've had a pretty rough ride in the last couple of months with, according to John's data, a reduction, 65% drop off since January. What's MIA doing specifically to encourage people to return?
Well, I think one of the things that the airport has done, and many airports have followed suit with this, is basically try to get traveler reassurance there that the airport environment itself, airlines are telling us, yes, it is safe to come on board and fly to your destination, but airports needed to do the same thing as well, and to reemphasize and build consumer confidence in that the airport experience, for better or for worse, is going to be a safe one for you. Similarly, we've gone into our programs of disinfecting, of sanitizing, of instituting mask program, where once you arrive at MIA, through your whole experience of getting onto that aircraft, and inclusive of your flight, is going to be one with a mask as well. We have also been working with our entities, our business entities in the community, both for travel, for tourism, the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau, our sister agency, the Port of Miami, which was, and hopefully will continue to be, the busiest cruise port in the world, along with economic development agencies in our community, to look at what can we do to spur more growth in there. And one of the things that is critical to our impact to the community as the leading economic generator to the community is what is MIA's influence in travel, but also tourism, but also in international commerce. International trade is the second leading industry in this community. And that for the most part has been working itself through. If we have time to talk about cargo, and term the new, as Mark said, working for a cargo airline now. I don't know if we have gained the right to keep the word, but we are using within MIA the word prater. which is a passenger aircraft now operating as a freighter. So if we've coined the term, we're taking a trademark on that one and trying to capitalize on something during this period. But all in all, the airport has been very, very much tuning up its messaging also through social media, through all particular channels to let the traveling public know that we are doing everything we can to make their experience at the airport a safe and expeditious one for their travel needs.
So I know that Miami is a really important hub for a number of airlines, and there's a lot of hub traffic that comes through your airport. But I've been reading a lot about airlines such as United introducing routes that are, direct flights from non-hubs. Moving away from the hub and spoke model to the point-to-point model. Allegiant does this very well as well. So, I was talking earlier a little bit about how networks are going to be fundamentally changed for the future. Is this an effective strategy in the current environment? And is this something that you can see moving forward or becoming more popular long-term? Anyone? The airlines?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in. So I would say that actually is our business model. So I think that the challenge, and again, I think carriers are searching for revenue. You looked at John's charts, and he, showed the winners and losers. In essence, where are people still traveling? Where aren't they traveling? And you've seen a lot of investment out west. Denver was a particularly strong market, which John's data showed. But then you've seen a lot of service recently added to markets like Bozeman and Jackson Hole and Telluride. And so carriers are chasing where there seems to be some demand. So when you look at network carriers introducing point-to-point, that's in essence what they're doing. I would say the jury's out on whether that will be successful or not, because they're stepping out of what they do well. Typically point-to-point leisure routes, people are looking for a good deal. And again, that's our bailiwick. It's what Frontier does. You mentioned Allegiant. We have lower costs, so we can offer lower fares. So it's going to be tricky. But right now, I think you see an openness by carriers. They've got a lot of planes sitting around doing nothing. So the bar is low to at least attempt some things.
So you mentioned chasing demand. It seems like the workload to keep on top of these travel trends has increased exponentially for network planners, and the result is less, shall we say, satisfactory than in the past. So, many planners have only known growth and success in the past decade, and how do you deal with this radically different environment? Also, the people that are doing these jobs, I'm sure that there have been furloughs. There's a lot more work to go around for a lot less people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I won't say it's easy, but by the same token, I've been in the industry over 37 years, so I remember the first Gulf War, I remember 9/11, I remember the Great Recession. So for me, I remember famine, not just feast, and so really it's an attention to detail. It's really studying the data literally daily. My team has really been at it 24/7. I couldn't be more proud of them. I mean, they stepped up in a big way and took a lot of pride in finding places that could put capacity where it could at least cover cost. And that was really the big focus, is just trying to cover your cash in this environment. So, you develop new reports that you didn't use before. You're looking at data that wasn't as important now is. And so that's really what's happened. Really almost laser focused to attention every single day.
So we're getting a bunch of really great questions from the audience, and I'm going to take one right off the bat here. What tools, technologies, or techniques are you really using or leveraging to better forecast the travel patterns during this pandemic? How do you figure this stuff out? Maybe John or Mark?
Yeah, I'll take that on. So we, as network planners, we typically relied on historical data. So what was the market size? What were the average fares that you experienced? So a lot of secondary data to make predictions about the future. So now it's a shift away from historical data that's basically useless at this point. Whatever market size data you have pretty much for the next 2 years, throw that out of your office because it basically has no value. So it now becomes a story of predictive analytics. So network planning and revenue management have never been more attached at the hip to make predictions about the future. So we've developed here at Air Canada what we call task force recovery, where we make predictions on the future based on the observations of many signals. It's almost kind of like an AI type of project, and signals that we're monitoring are search data, quarantines, corporate demand, and we're bringing it to a segment level. So John alluded to before, VFR traffic bouncing back earlier, leisure traffic bouncing back earlier, premium long haul travel, that might take, who knows, 5 years to recover, maybe longer. So it's almost looking at it at a segment level and making predictions based on predictions based on primary data that you have about future sort of intentions. So it's a complete radical shift in the way we basically do planning, and more than ever, it really is a commercial wide synergy that's required, where it's your sales team, your RM team, your alliances team, and your network team come together and make decisions holistically. Whereas before, network kind of dictated, this is where we're going, and everybody kind of followed suit.
So Chris, with the airlines being in such uncertainty, obviously that affects what happens at the airports as well. How are you in conversation with your airline customers on how does that actually work? I think we want to know, how does the logistics of where an airline decides to fly next week, how does that affect your operations at Miami?
Yeah, I think there's the operational aspect of it, and at a time when gates are not at a premium, and there are no gate holes or any hard stands or anything of the sort, and I think a lot of us are experiencing that. It's also a reflective time for us in network planning or air service development to come to understand just exactly what's happened. You used the United example a little while ago, and that is something that of course an airline and other airlines are pursuing point to point at this time, because there is nothing else out there to pursue. We are a major hub airport, and 50% of our international traffic connects. And most of it is connecting between the continents of Europe and South America. If you have border closures, if you have quarantines, if you have the two largest airlines in South America under bankruptcy proceedings, if you have a European Union and says, you North Americans cannot come here right now. I mean, you got to take all those, dynamics into consideration and realize that the hub word right now is non-existent, and we are all looking, measuring, and aiming for point-to-point service as we move forward in the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is that we're looking at. I think the words of short, medium, and long-term planning for all of us have really changed. And looking ahead and saying this is where we're going to be a year from now or 2 years from now. And there's that black hole out there that says normalcy 2024, really? Totally unexpected. As John alluded to, the famines that we have considered during the last decade, 2 decades, 2.5 decades, are nothing compared to what we're experiencing right now, simply because of the uncertainty of where we're going.
Pilar, I think if I can just add to this whole thing about data, there's a couple of things that are really fascinating. It's not just the data we've used and we can no longer use because it's invalid, as Mark quite rightly says, and we all go to look at search data and intent. Well, there's a bit of a pit hole in that, because when you're all trapped at home for 6 months, you tend to look for what you think you might be able to do, but you actually can't. But the whole data spectrum now has to include things such as what countries are open, what countries are closed, where is the next spike coming from? We know that this has wrapped around the globe from China, around the whole of the globe, and eventually reach Latin America, and the second spike is coming. So does that mean in Europe, North America is going to be next with the second spike? And if so, how deep is it? And will there be a third one? So I think for Mark and for John, it must be horrendous, because those booking profiles between a leisure and a business passenger are one and the same, but there is no business passenger. It's extremely difficult at this moment in time. And it is intuition. And, all of these people who say airlines are cancelling flights because of this and at short notice, absolutely, but at least they're trying to do something and make something happen rather than sit there and just stare into an abyss.
That sounds pretty scary, just from my perspective.
But John and Mark have got to try, you know, and best endeavours to them in that exercise.
Indeed. You know, I'm getting a lot of questions here. One of them, a little bit related to this, is a great question. How are you changing your predictive models without the historical data? Mark, you mentioned you can take this historical data that you've had and throw it out the window. How are you changing those predictive models? And do you anticipate this change to be long lasting, or how long do you expect it to be this way?
I expect it to be at least the next 24 months. And again, we talk about predictive modeling. It's all about getting down to customer segmentation level and looking at which segments will be the most resilient. So if we believe that VFR travel, leisure travel will be the most resilient, it's about shifting your network strategy to take on that type of demand. Here in Canada, we're a very multicultural society. We've got very large populations of ethnic populations here. So there's places all over the world that people are trying to get to. And, you know, obviously Zoom and Teams and all this kind of stuff most certainly cannot replace, you know, being with your family or visiting your friends in person. So that's why we think that's more resilient. And when it comes to leisure travel, we all want, you know, everything I hear is we can't wait to get back on an airplane. Being trapped at home, I think, gives everybody the intent to travel for leisure purposes that much more. But again, when you look at carriers that are more dependent on premium travel, long-haul travel, business travel, that might not come back till 2019 levels until mid part of the decade, or may not even come back to 2019 levels. So knowing that and making those kinds of predictions, given all the signals that we're getting, allows us to tailor the network plan and our fleet strategy going forward. So I would say at least 24 months, but most likely 36 months of this kind of stuff.
Wow, wow. You know, you're juggling all these things. You're using intuition and instinct to try and, you know, make this stuff work. Do you have any practical lessons learned? It's some of the do's and don'ts that, you know, in your daily work that you can share with the group here in trying to make this function as best you can.
Do's is most definitely have an open mind, and we need to be agile and quick. You know, don'ts at this point is don't assume anything. You know, 2020 has all taught us lessons, and basically watching your whole business get disrupted from A to Z. So basically take nothing for granted, and don't assume that things are just going to continue to get better on from here. That, you know, and be ready for any scenario. You know, we've got a optimistic scenario, a realistic scenario, and a pessimistic scenario, and we need to be ready for all three. So that's kind of the attitude we're taking here.
Like I said earlier, it sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds very scary to me.
No,
I'm going to take another.
Yeah, no, we just say we joke here. You know, we're basically in the second quarter we carried 4% of our normal passenger volumes. I said we never worked harder for that 4%.
I'm sure.
So yeah.
I'm sure. I'm going to take another question from the audience here from Stefan Marcoux. What are your thoughts on having mandatory PCR tests in order to avoid quarantines that are creating such disruption right now in the networks?
I'll jump in on that one. It's a challenge because anything that restricts people's access. I mean, we obviously want 100% for folks to be safe, but between the communication and the requirements, it does have a dampening effect on demand. We know people want to go, but they don't understand what they need to do. Sometimes they have to come. They go and they come back. They get to the airport. They find out they don't have what they need to take. So I would say it's you know, we want safety. We want countries to do what's important for them, but we think it's important also that the communication is there and it's backed by science, not just motion.
Chris, is this something that also the airports are thinking of introducing, you know, on an airport-wide basis, not just on a single flight or airline bases?
Yes, it is, and I think we're seeing it happen. Again, what's happening is what John alluded to, and that is, ultimately airports, airlines can seize this opportunity, but what we're doing to our audience, if you will, out there is really confusing them. In coming to understand that this airport, but this airline, what we need is uniformity. And acceptance in the industry, both airlines, airports, and the higher authorities that are out there that advise us or speak on our behalf, IATA, Airports Council, those agencies all need to, and I think they are working on it. There's been a lot coming out through the press this past week on coming together and coming to the realization of this is, if you're going to institute this airline A or airport B, these are the standards that need to be put together, and so that we are telling the traveling public out there, this is what you need to do. So they're not showing up at the airport and without documentation, without having gone through the procedures, whatever it is that they need to do. So let's get one message, let's get one that we all agree to, and then I think you can leave it up to the airports and the airlines to institute it accordingly. Very important. Very important.
Chris, isn't part of the challenge here? We're in October, and this crisis started in March. In the United Kingdom, we just have the UK government has just started a task force to look at this particular issue. The whole industry and our regulators, our advisors, appear to me to have been woefully behind the curve and not helped in this whole process. We've seen 68-page documents with different criteria from one organisation to another organisation. How do we as an industry embrace that type of thing? And most importantly, perhaps, it would help Mark and it would help John if airlines were able to plan with confidence that if an R rate does increase, the route continues to operate rather than it being shut down and you must be home by 4 o'clock the next morning. Otherwise, you're stuck for 2 weeks.
Yeah. I think I need to remind us, and we don't have to go way back in history. Let's just go post 9/11 with DHS and TSA and the regulations that came down the pike, as we say, as a result of that. And here it is at the highest levels of U.S. government, bringing this down to us, if you will, for airlines, airports, and the traveling public to observe, yet the chaotic conditions that existed. Take off your shoes, don't take off your shoes. You may do this here, you may not do this there. And that is with the government at the highest level here. I'm not going to get political on what's happening in 2020, on where this should have commenced and where perhaps it should have trickled down. And John wouldn't be asking the question that he just asked if we look at it from the same approach perhaps should have taken place there. There was a lot of wish fulfillment in this, in thinking in the very beginning that we will go through a period, perhaps we will go through a quarter or two, this would subside and some kind of normalcy will return. And reality is slapping us today, telling us, as Mark just said, we could be 36 months away perhaps from seeing that normalcy return. So how we're operating today isn't going to work. And there is more need for stringent set of policies of how the customer will come to the airport and what will need to be done moving forward, because we just can't sit back and say, well, after phase 3, perhaps there won't be any more phases. What if 2 years from now there's a phase 6? So.
Yes, it seems as this was a wake-up call for everyone to try and, prepare a little bit better for such an eventuality. You mentioned you don't want to get political, but I am going to ask a question that came from our audience, so it's not from me, it's from someone who's listening in. It's a political question, and I'm going to be a little provocative here. So how will the results of the US election impact air travel in the US? Anyone?
Well, the challenge with that is, again, you're sort of guessing at this point, right? We don't know what policies may come out of the election results. Obviously, if the incumbent is successful and the makeup of the Senate and House in terms of the majority stays the same, I guess you'd say it'd be more of the same, right? So you're asking what happens if the Democrats win obviously the presidency as well as the House. And, we'll see. I mean, there has been a lot of speculation about restrictions, passenger rights and so on. But there's maybe some other good things. There may be more of a liberal approach to air service. So I think it's hard to really answer that. I know you're trying to be provocative, but it's a tricky one to really just latch on to a specific point.
Sorry, I was on mute. Just wanted to ask Chris for his opinion.
I think John was very eloquent and expressed it exceptionally well. Does Chris have an opinion? He certainly has an opinion, and I don't think we're here to express opinions. I think it is a wait and see game, and obviously that one is not that far down the road. That one we're going to see materialize in a relatively short period of time, no matter which way it all goes. Yeah. Was that good enough for you, Pilar?
Our listeners want to know. That's why I asked the question. So another question from our audience. Will the airlines take advantage of lower capacity at traditionally space-constrained airports? And how will this whole crisis change the situation with slots in the future?
Well,
Mark? Sorry, go ahead, Mark or John.
That's a tough question, because just to keep the slots that you have at some of these airports globally and even within the US and fly them all for the next, again, 12 months, even probably longer, will be difficult. So for the purposes of Air Canada alone, just covering what you have at these space constrained airports will be challenging. So to talk about going into others or taking advantage of opportunities elsewhere, that's really difficult in these current circumstances. I think other players could be interested. Like if you look at a place like Heathrow, perhaps some of the low-cost players might see this as an opportunity to jump in. You've got JetBlue and WestJet and other carriers that are looking to move from Gatwick to Heathrow. That's an opportunity for them. But generally speaking, I don't see too much more of that, especially from established carriers.
Yeah, on my side, though, I would say it's already happening. So carriers are definitely taking advantage of real estate opportunities that weren't there before and growing for sure. And then I think that the whole slot situation, I think it's a great question right now, because you've got the airport operators, I'll just say the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, because they operate LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. And even though Newark is not a level 3 airport, it was, and it operates very much like a level 3 airport in terms of landing rights. It's fully constrained. So when you think about that, that operator, and you can say the same thing from MWA and DCA and so on, they're losing a lot of revenue, and they've got a facility that people want to use, but they can't get people that want to use it because the people that have the slots are grandfathered into those rights. So I won't go on it because we sent a letter in. We believe that the slots should be allowed to basically go to the open market. If people want to fly, they should have the ability to fly, but no one's going to invest if they can't get it on a permanent basis. So, but I do think real estate, recent move by Southwest Airlines to jump in Intercontinental and Air was likely driven by the fact that there's some capacity allocated for them. Our move into Orange County, we were able to leapfrog over 9 other airlines on the waiting list because we were willing to jump in 2020. And the reason that they gave us that option was because they weren't getting a lot of lift in 2020, and they took an unprecedented move. So I think the first part of your question is happening, and the second part of your question, I think, needs a real strong look at.
Pilar, I think it's really interesting because if you look out, not just in North America, but you look at Heathrow, a regional carrier in the United Kingdom has secured a slot for an 8:15 arrival at Heathrow with a Jetstream 41, 5 days a week. Now, firstly, great kudos to them, because we will see the market harden at some point, and it will harden at those cachet airports that are lucrative, such as Heathrow. they'll probably sell it in 5 years' time and make 25 million bucks or whatever it happens to be. And Mark might be in the market to buy it, I don't know. But what we're actually seeing is secondary airports in major cities in many parts of the world, and indeed in the US, lose custom because there is this gravitational pull to the major airport in each city. And you see it in places like Tokyo, where Narita is hemorrhaging because Haneda has opened up a load more slots in the last year. You see it in London, you see it in Paris, you're seeing it in Germany, where Munich is losing slots. There is a whole dynamic and a shift of frequency that network planners are today looking at and exploiting opportunities for. And John's quite right. Those who can move first get the advantage, and kudos to him for being able to get in there and jump the queue.
And you mentioned the secondary airports. This gets us back to the question about hubs and the hub and spoke model as opposed to the point-to-point. Another question from our audience: could the network airlines survive without the reliance on hubs and spokes?
I think that's one for Mark. I think that's one for Mark.
Yeah, I think it's a tale of two stories again. I think internationally, long-haul travel, it's the amount of unique city pairs that you're going to see is going to reduce, and reliance to hubs is going to increase. I think, you know, low-cost transatlantic, and even if there was some trans-Pacific, is basically weakened so substantially. Just look at the Norwegian story and the Level story, et cetera. So I think the hub-spoke system for international travel is only going to go the opposite way and become more reliant on those kinds of models. Now, within North America or within Europe, you know, because the investment cost of narrow-body aircraft is so much less than a wide-body aircraft, you know, definitely, you know, the hub and spoke model, there's going to be some pressure there. You know, and an airline like Spirit is well positioned to take advantage of that.
John, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, I mean, I think both models are resilient. You know, obviously, there's a reason why the hub and spoke model has been around for a long, long time. It allows you to aggregate passengers and allows you to support more capacity than you know, than you could otherwise. So I do think it's resilient, but I think it's going to be challenged in this current environment. You know, I think our point-to-point model fits really well right now, but I think it also fits in the future as well. Again, the focus really is if you can keep your costs low, you can offer fares that are very attractive. And also in this environment, I think even in the future, people want to go nonstop as much as they can. So if they can go nonstop and overfly a hub, I think they will, if the price is right or the same. So, but I do think both models are resilient.
So another question from the audience, going back to the question about data, maybe John Grant would have an opinion on this. What type of data would help airlines better plan for the future that one does not have access to today?
Simple answer: knowing when the vaccine's over, Pilar, and we can all get back traveling. But we're not going to get that quicker than anything. I think it really is that whole amalgam of data, and whether you put it into an AI environment or you try and manually crunch it, because, you know, quite frankly, if you ask anyone about network planning, you know, it's quite frequently about smelling the coffee and seeing the numbers and blending them with your own experience and your own knowledge. And John and Mark will know that better than any. But certainly look to book. I do genuinely look at the OAG data and see who's moving capacity on a week-by-week basis, because I think it gives you an indication of the broader industry sentiment. And, you know, I sadly say the airline industry is quite frequently like lemmings. We follow each other to destinations, and some of us stay there and others drop off the cliff and go somewhere else. So I think look to book. I completely agree that classic booking, CRS, MIDT data has completely gone. Google Analytics, I think, is a great place to look. All of those sort of other supplemental sources that were, this time 7 months ago, were on the fringe, and we were playing with and beginning to see if we could do any sort of correlation between what that data was saying and what our conventional data sources were telling us. That's suddenly been thrust right to the front of our analytics and our data intelligence. And, you know, there is no one single source. It is a combination of that and giving it to someone like John or Mark and saying, you've smelt it, does it look like it's going to be good? Is it worth a punt? And most importantly, if you try and it sticks, stick. But if it's not working, get out quickly. That, you know, be prepared to fail quickly.
So we've got about 10 more minutes. And so I'm going to try and fit in 2 or 3 more questions here. Another one from the audience, perhaps directed at Chris. First of all, what creative ideas are there out there for airlines and airports to work together to stimulate traffic and get routes going again? I know we're talking about the vaccine and about the sanitation, but is there anything that we haven't mentioned that will get, you know, people to come back?
I don't know if it's from a marketing standpoint for airports and airlines. Airports have their limitations in terms of we don't have the access to, and if we did, to be able to sell that information, if you will, to the airlines. The airlines are readily capable of developing that. And as we're hearing from all of our other colleagues here, the dynamics are changing on a daily or weekly basis. When OAG is talking about looking at their information on a daily and weekly basis, instead of, wow, just 6 months ago we looked out 3 months or 6 months and knew where we were going to be at that time period. I think what the dynamic that I think is important right now for airports and airlines is the financial dynamic. Coming to understand each other now more than ever. There's always been, when it comes down to the finances, and particularly what an airline has to pay to operate at an airport, have been adversarial roles. And I think now is the time, and it has been for us at MIA, to really sit down with our carriers. We just went through several months of sitting down with our majority and interest carriers in order for us to submit our budget, which our fiscal year began October 1. And it works. It really works. I mean, there's contentious moments, but I think we kind of finally come to understand what the airlines are going through, what airports are going through. We have 3 concourses closed at the moment. But 3 are still open. The operational costs of a 7 million square foot facility are phenomenal. People would not be able to believe those numbers, but I think the airlines and the airport itself have come to better understand each other in this process. We have been, when October 1 kicked in, we were able to maintain our rates and charges the same. Despite what's going on right now, despite the drop in landing fees and lack of service by carriers, passenger facility charges, the whole gamut, all of those funds that come together to give us our operating revenues for the year. And it was through no magic. It took a lot of sitting down with our airlines and working out these numbers and deferring some other programs, deferring other costs and everything else in order to offer the airlines 1 more fiscal year at least right now of paying what you used to pay to operate at our airport. So I think those are the things that need to happen right now during this period that we're going through, and perhaps will be going through for the next 2-3 years, and that is for better collaboration.
Yeah, I'll just add, you know, we're not oblivious to the fact that, you know, airports are going through a tough time as well. And so that really, that partnership is really important right now, where we can try to keep the costs under wrap, because it really is a chicken and egg. If costs get out of control, you're going to be less likely to add more capacity. You don't add the capacity, the costs don't come down. And so I applaud you, Chris, and obviously MIA, for keeping your costs in check, because that'll encourage your carriers when demand comes back to add the capacity there. That's really important.
I think we have time for 1 more question from the audience, from Louis-Charles Lavadour. Should we expect heightened partnerships between airlines in the following years? Can you talk a little bit about the joint ventures or the partnerships or the code shares and all that? Is that something that we can expect to increase in the coming years following this crisis? Maybe Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So my strong belief is that partnerships have never been more important than ever. And especially for an airline like us, with part of Star Alliance in a joint venture with United and the Lufthansa Group, leveraging their network leveraging their commercial synergies will allow us to ramp our own international network up faster than normal. So, partnerships in this day and age are going to be very key, and everybody's going to be leaning on each other to rebuild their networks. So more than ever, I think this is going to be absolutely key.
John, how does OAG see this?
Well, yeah, undoubtedly, I'd be interested to ask Mark, the question about foreign ownership. How, as an industry, we still have 960 odd airlines, 760 filing schedules every week. There's just too many airlines, aren't there, Mark? The reason we are where we are is because if we allowed consolidation, then, we'd have a Coca-Cola, a Pepsi, and maybe a couple of others. And we'd be in a better place as an industry today.
Well, I'm not going to take on that question too much, John, because here in Canada we've got some strict foreign ownership laws.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
But you've probably seen that Air Canada has reached a revised agreement to purchase Air Transat, who runs a leisure business out of Canada, also voted the world's best leisure airline. We think both of our businesses are complementary, and the timing has never been better to bring the two companies together and create a powerful Canadian airline that handles business customers, premium customers, but also leisure customers. So I think you'll see a lot of that occurring. But right now everybody is going to be in a very difficult position in terms of the amount of debt that's on each other's balance sheets. So acquisitions may become even more challenging than before. But definitely I agree with your point that some level of consolidation is required in the industry.
That the other side of that equation, Mark, of course, is that debt provides opportunity for a sovereign state to move in.
That's true. Good point.
And John, can you add just one last comment about partnerships with Spirit?
And no, for us, we always think about never say never to anything, but right now we're very comfortable going it alone. We think there's a lot of runway left in our business model. So for us, that's not something in the near term.
Great. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up now. We're at 58 minutes past the hour. We still have 50 questions in our Q&A queue. So obviously this discussion has created a lot of interest and a lot of questions from our audience members. We could have spent another hour chatting about all this endlessly fascinating topics. This is really only a quick look at North America, a little bit of Latin America, and we'd love to speak about these issues in other regions in a future webinar. I want to say a great big thank you to all of our panelists for giving their time and expertise so generously, and a special thanks to our sponsors, Miami International Airport and OAG. A download of this webinar will be available shortly on FlightGlobal.com, and a report will be running on the website as well. So please check back on the website to see our lineup of further events in the future under the Events and Webinars tab. We have a bunch of really exciting things going on here at FlightGlobal. So thank you all once again for joining us today from wherever in the world you joined us from. I hope it was an informative session and that it was well worth your time. From all of us here at FlightGlobal, please stay safe and see you soon. Good day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Pilar.
Thank you.